Because of the strange life that we have been thrown into after leaving our positions as college professors, we are pretty well insulated compared to most people to various kinds of mandates, right? Mm-hmm. Because, we run our own business out of our own home. We don't interact with as many systems that are capable of inflicting penalties on us. But we've, in fact, run into penalties twice this week. And I'm not going to talk about the particular details of the organizations in question. But twice we have encountered discrimination based on an unwillingness to receive these vaccines, and no alternative is offered, right? It is not that they are saying you can't participate unless you provide evidence that you don't have COVID with a recent test, which frankly I think is probably unnecessary given where we are with COVID. But I'd be willing to do that, right? Because we are not indifferent to other people's health, and because COVID is a serious disease.
I wish I thought it was a truthful and accurate indicator. But given that I don't believe that of the vaccines anyway, if we're in that landscape, at least having that be an option,
right,
would be a way to allow all human beings to participate in whatever it is that we're trying to participate in.
Not even just allow.
Mm-hmm.
My suspicion, based on everything you and I have uncovered and looked into, is that a person who has a negative test, especially in light of the fact that the tests seem to be biased in the direction of diagnosing COVID where it might not be.
They tend more towards false positives.
Right.
That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
My suspicion is that a person who has a recent negative test is safer to be around from the point of view of the likelihood of catching COVID from them than somebody who's been vaccinated a month or two ago, mm-hmm. who could very well have COVID and you wouldn't know.
Right.
So the point is, if you're really trying to protect your event from COVID, and I understand, certainly, even if you didn't believe in these vaccines as being safe and effective, mm-hmm. I can certainly imagine being in the position of hosting an event and imagining that somebody's going to come through the door and, there might be an event where people get COVID at at the thing that you're hosting. And, obviously there are consequences. There could be legal consequences. Why weren't you vigilant about blah, blah, blah,
right.
And there could be,
social
damage to your organization's reputation. So I'm sympathetic. And that's why I'm willing at my own expense to get tested to participate. But what I'm not willing to do is pretend that it is acceptable for us to be othering each other over these remedies. These remedies are not high quality and they're dangerous, and there is no nuance whatsoever being offered with them. So the idea, that an organization would say, well, you're not vaccinated, you can't participate, when they didn't even ask us if we'd had COVID, mm-hmm. right? So if we had COVID and hadn't had a vaccine, we would be the safest people to be around, at least as far as Delta goes. So the fact that they didn't ask means that this isn't really about health in the first place, or it's so unnuanced as to be absurd. And so enough. We cannot continue othering each other. And that means, effectively, note that you are being used by something that hasn't even figured out, if it is interested in health at all, it hasn't even figured out how to age stratify or how to separate out those who are immune from a natural source versus a vaccine source. It hasn't done any of this work. Right? And it has you othering other people. Yep. That's an immoral entity. And so the point is, we have to start turning the heat up on those who would do the bidding of this thing. Right?
Yes. And I actually saw, we also saw an example online. This didn't directly affect us, but there are some cities now that actually have vaccine mandates for indoor dining. Seattle is one of them. We were looking to eat at a place not in Seattle where there are not mandates handed down from the authorities, but where some cities, some institutions like restaurants do have vaccine mandates. Most of them also say negative test within some number of hours at the door, but most do not. And I was looking at a restaurant that looked really fabulous and that had all these great reviews, except somehow the overall review average was very low, and it was about the 3 most recent reviews who were all from, it turns out, members of the same party, had gone to the same meal. And at first I thought, oh, the restaurant was having an off night or something. Well, it turns out, upon reading these reviews, that the major objection that the people in this party had was that they went out for some big event. There were many of them that went out to this meal, and that this restaurant did not require proof of vaccination. And that on that basis, these three individuals who had what sounds like a very good meal were effectively engaging in the very same tactics as cancel culture. They had the ability, given that this is a restaurant that has not been in existence for a lot of time, and so didn't have so many reviews, that the three most recent ones being terrible didn't affect the overall rankings. They had a chance, and especially in an era of restaurants struggling to survive and it not being clear what they're going to be required to do by the city or the state or whatever. It was particularly appalling that people would go after a restaurant this way for failing to put up a should be their choice vaccine mandate for entry into their restaurant, when, again, COVID is not the only risk to you out there, guys. And for almost everyone, it is not the major risk to you by a long shot. And again, I'm not going to use the specifics here, but the restaurant owner or his agent responded to the lengthiest of these galling reviews and said, "We're very sorry about these other experiences that you had, but with regard to vaccine mandates, this is our choice. We choose not to require evidence of vaccination against COVID at the door." I was about to say, he did not say, nor do we require evidence of vaccination against rabies at the door, right? And most people are never going to run into rabies. You and I are vaccinated against rabies because we once lived a life in which we were being exposed potentially to rabies with some regularity. And that vaccine was time tested and understood to be effective as well. So the owner stood up for himself. And as far as I can tell from the website, they're doing a brisk business still, and actually doing it despite the techniques of, frankly, the woke ideologues, the religious-like people who would have us believe that all white people are racists, and you can be a man if you say you're a man, or a woman if you say you're a woman, and that all sexual assault is equivalent, and all of the other garbage that's coming out of sort of social justice ideology. Those tactics, cancel culture tactics, are now here over in, we found the next enemy, and it's you. You're dirty, you're mean, you're disrespectful, you're heinous, you're evil if you're unvaccinated. You, me, you. If you are unvaccinated, you're the enemy, and therefore all rules are off the table. I can do whatever I want in order to get you canceled, and in this case, a restaurant that simply doesn't mandate that you, as an unvaccinated person, are excluded.
Yeah, it effectively treats being unvaccinated with these vaccines as synonymous with being diseased and contagious.
Yes.
And that is preposterous. If these vaccines worked, that would be preposterous. Yes. But these vaccines do not. And Gibraltar, for example, tells you that their fantasy world in which everybody gets vaccinated and COVID goes away does not exist. Right. So they don't have the right to do this to us. And so the question is, if I was running a business, frankly, we see signs on doors that say, masks required and all. I'm increasingly annoyed by those signs. I don't know the extent to which those signs are mandated versus voluntary.
In Oregon, it's mandated by our governor.
Right. Now, the question then is, can somebody who is enlightened, who understands the reality of masks, that this is not an N95 mask mandate, nor is this a mask mandate that correctly parses the difference between putting a mask on a sick person and putting a mask on a person who shows no signs of being sick, versus the absurdity of putting a mask on somebody who's had COVID and recovered and therefore is really unlikely to transmit the disease, maybe at the level of zero likelihood, right? So what the question is, maybe, if I ran a business and I had to put that sign in my door, what else would I put on my door to indicate that I was actually aware of the absurdity of this and that the real purpose was, it's some variation on the "don't hurt me" wall.
Yes.
Right. The wall of signs that say Black Lives Matter was not about somebody emphasizing by repeating it that Black Lives Matter. It was about somebody broadcasting something about their own, compliance. And this is likewise not so dissimilar from the videos that we saw of people being harassed while dining, right? Put up your fist and say Black Lives Matter, or we'll harass you on video and broadcast it to the internet, right? The question is, can you dine here? Well, are you vaccinated? Are you willing to say that Black Lives Matter on video? It's all the same thing.
What will they put up with? What will everyone put up with? To what degree will what percentage of the population put up with this? How about this? How about this? Now we know.
Right.
What then happens?
And it is effectively like, well, we, the agents of the narrative, have the right to demand that you indicate that you are compliant with the narrative. And at the point you indicate you aren't compliant with the narrative, then we have the right to stigmatize you, right? And that is now happening. It's not exactly like it went down with woke and BLM, but it's not so different either. It's clearly a variation on the same playbook.
Yeah.
And, this fits very well with what we've been saying about, there's woke, original flavor woke, and then there's medical woke, right? And the point is, these have nothing to do with science or a detailed analysis that reveals a pattern. That these are narrative assertions that then cause citizens to step in and do what government cannot, right? Citizens are being used against each other. And it is very much, is it exactly brown shirts? No. But the problem is, why are we in that quadrant of the library? Why are we searching for analogies in that quadrant of the library? That should be telling you something. Yeah. Right? That should be telling you something. And so the point is, what? It's not brown shirts, but it's not so different either, right? It's not Tuskegee, but it's not so different either, right? There are genuine, real analogies to be drawn here. And the fact is that, Zach, will you put up the image I sent you? This is effectively what they're doing to us, right? This iconic image of separate drinking fountains. Right? We are being told that the world has to break down this way. And frankly, I don't know. This is obviously way before our time. I don't know what the official rationalization was for separate drinking fountains. It certainly has an epidemiological implication, right? Which is, of course, obviously stupid and absurd. It's not like people within a race don't give each other diseases, right? So this was obviously a phony implication that these drinking fountains needed to be separated, and it's not so different.
Well, I think the rhetoric, like now, was around dirtiness and lesser status and lesser worth.
Yeah. It is. And, enough. So what I hope, obviously our core audience is not new to the idea that something wrong is afoot and that the narrative is taking liberties it has no right to take and it isn't based in science. But for those who are maybe encountering us early or beginning to wake up to the idea that they've been dragged into something that isn't what they were told, please think about the degree to which you are being used to do the bidding of a government that can't do this itself. It needs your help to stigmatize other citizens. And the first thing to do is to stop complying.